So I'm Patrick Mahedy, and I'm a senior traffic engineer with QFree. I worked for a couple of years as just a general transportation consultant, doing design of traffic signals and engineering side. And then I got the opportunity to work for a state agency here in Oregon for 4 years and did traffic signal timing for 100 intersections. I think the major thing with the QFree controller as the engineer, and maybe not the technician, is the web interface is very sharp and useful for timing. So most of the time I'll be in that web interface, but we still have full functionality from the front panel. You can do everything on the controller. Other than that, I just think of the MAXTIME system is very robust. So if you want to do something, you can probably do it. It's kind of like building with Legos. If you need options, you need lots and lots of plans, you need something a little off, maybe running 2 intersections on one controller, we can probably accommodate those things. If you're unboxing this for the first time, kind of the first principles you want to know, obviously you want to plug it in, whether that's a NEMA controller or 2070. The NEMAs have a on-off switch on the front, and then on the 2070s, if you open the front panel, the power supply has an on-off switch. Once you get it on, you'll come to the main menu. You'll have settings, and then the programs that are running on the controller. This particular controller is just running the base version of MAXTIME, but if you were running adaptive, connected vehicle, it would all show here. And then you'll enter MAXTIME, and you can look at the 3 main menu options, which are status, controller, and administration. Out the box, the really important things to get right are the basic things. So you want to go into administration, set up your communications. So when you get in the field, it has the right IP address. The important thing there is that's tied to the machine. It's not tied to your timing. If you change out timing, it will not update your IP address. Otherwise, to get started out of the box, you'll want to go into MAXTIME. So you're going to go to administration and go to database management. Select a starter database, whether that's TS1, TS2, or 2070 database, and we can get started configuring. How to set up the base database, you'll start at the main screen where you have settings and MAXTIME. You'll hit 1 for MAXTIME, and then you'll go to 3 for administration. And from administration, we'll go to 4 for database management. And in here, you can copy, select a database, select from USB, or select from the system databases. So usually there's some preloaded databases. Most agencies will have a base template that you'll run to configure. In our case, we'll just use one of the factory databases. So we can go down, we can press select database 3, and you can hit plus or minus. In this case, we are looking at a 12-channel ATC cabinet, but I will move on to a standard NEMA TS2-1. You'll hit enter, and then we will see here, and now it's waiting for a reboot. So to get the database to take hold, you'll need to turn the controller off, wait for it to actually drop out, which usually takes a second, and then start it back up. And now we'll be in the new factory database for a NEMA TS2 controller. So once you've selected the right database for your cabinet, which ensures that your I/O and other things are correct, the process from there is pretty standardized. So while the I/Os are different, for most cabinets, the general programming will all be the same. So the main's broken down into status, controller, administration. To do any sort of configuration of the controller, we will be in the controller menu, which is 2. So go into the controller menu. You'll have a bunch of options. There'll be some unit options, some other things that you want to set up. Hopefully you have them set up in a template. They'll control, how long do you want to stay in all red coming out of flash. Little things like that matter, but maybe you don't need to configure every time. The bulk of the work will be under 2 in phase. In here, you can choose phase timing plans under 1. And then it will prompt you to ask you what plan number. So an important thing about MAXTIME is there are lots of different plans to support lots of different operations. Most of the time, you'll just be in plan 1. So we'll hit 1, hit enter, and now you'll see all of your phase data, in here. You can set your walk times, your flashing don't walk times, minimums, maximums, everything you would need for basic free operation can be configured in this menu. And then if you hit escape under this menu, there's also the phase options plan. So you might want to get in the phase options plan if you want to set up a recall. Some other basic things are in here, but between those two, which it will also ask you for the plan number, you should be able to set up a basic free intersection with those two menus. The plans are in there just for some variability. So if you had anything varying by time of day, you might have two different plans. So a lot of the time, the way you would see some agencies run their coordination with both maximum timers and coordinated splits or force-offs. And you'll see a lot of the time customers will configure multiple phase plans for each coordination plan. That way they can have max that are only associated with that coordination plan. Out the box, it will run an 8-phase intersection. The I/O that you chose when you chose your factory database should hook up and work. If you want to get into the next steps of kind of detailed configuration, I would go to the Detector menu. So if we go back out to the main menu, from to Controller, we'll go to 4 for detection. And here, same as the phase plans, you've got vehicle detector plans. We'll click on 1 for vehicle detector plans, specify plan 1, hit enter, and in here you'll have all of your detectors running across the top, and you can configure anything that you would want for that detector. So some of the example options would be things that are simple, like delays and extensions, or some more complicated options like switch phasing, other things. So really depends on your context of the intersection, but from this menu you can configure most of your detector parameters. And then again, similar to phase plans, we have an options page. So in MAXTIME, the plans pages generally are the things that you need to assign for numbers, right? Yellow interval is 4 seconds long, things like that. The options plans are more checkboxes. So maybe I want to modify the operation. I would come in here. So as an example, in the detector options, you can set up the detectors to do things like call or extend the signal. You might have some detectors that you don't actually want to call or extend the signal. They're just there for data collection. So once you set that up, your intersection will definitely be running free. If you want to get into coordination, those are different menus. Yeah, so if you ever need any additional information or there's a parameter you don't understand while you're on the front panel navigating through a menu, in this case, this is the phase plans menu, you can hit the star button and it will bring up the help menu description of that parameter. Some parameters are defined by NTCIP and some of them are specific to the MAXTIME controller. So one of the first things you'll want to check when you're looking at timing, maybe not configuring it, but trying to understand some other timing, or configuring your own, is the scheduler. So the scheduler will control what the controller is doing by time of day. You can click into the scheduler from the controller menu by pressing 6, and in here you'll have schedules, day plans, and actions. The schedules are where you'll want to start first. There'll be options in here to define which day plan you're running, and then you have checkboxes for day of the week, month, year, and date. The day plan that will run is the one that is the most specific. So you'll usually set these up in an order that allows you to do that. You'll have one for weekdays, weekends, and then if you have a holiday, it will have the least checkboxes, therefore be the most specific, and it's what will run that day. So you want to check on here what day plan you're running. In the day plans, you'd see what you'd traditionally see in a time of day table. So you'll have event numbers, and then a time, and then the action to run at that time. So if you wanted to run coordination plan 1 at 8 o'clock, you would put in 8 minutes, 0, and then for action, you would press 1, and you'd hit enter, and then escape. So currently, day plan 1 would, at 8 o'clock, begin pattern 1, or action 1, which corresponds to pattern 1. Generally, the agencies will keep actions equal to patterns. So action 1 is pattern 1, action 2, pattern 2. You can change it if you want. It just adds complexity. So you can go into 3 and check actions. And in here, we'll see what I was talking about. Action 1, pattern 1, action 2, pattern 2, going down the list. So once you know what the scheduler is asking the controller to do, and you know what action you're running, and therefore what pattern you're running, you can go look at the settings for that specific pattern under the controller menu, and then under 5 for coordination. In here, you'll want to choose 2 for patterns. And in here, you can set what you would normally need to set for general operations. So you'll have your cycle length, your offset information in here. And then there are also split tables. You'll need to configure your splits based on your cycle length. The splits are under 3. So if you hit 3, again, like the rest of MAXTIME, ask you for which split you're referring to. We'll hit 1 in this case, hit enter, and you'll see your phases or your rows, and then you can enter your times. And then if you want to get specific coordination parameters, you can fit them in here. So if you have an absolute minimum you want to do during transition, you can set that. You have a maximum during transition. And then some other items like whether it's a coordinated phase or the reference point for the offset. So once you have configured your coordination, which consists of your pattern information and your split information, you should be able to run the signal coordinated operation. You will need to do recalls if you don't have detection. If you do have detection, it should already be working through the detection menus that you set up. So this will get you running coordination, and then a great menu to reference, especially when you're configuring something, troubleshooting. You'll want to hit 1 for status and go to 2, extended summary. And on here, it will explain to you all of the different things the signal is doing. So you can go through these menus, and there's a longer description of this menu in the manual, but generally it will tell you all of the plans that you're in. So if you're curious, what phase plan am I running right now? What detector plan am I running right now? It will show you all of that information on one screen, just in case you're confused, or if you come up to an intersection and you want to change something, you can come to this menu, see what you're in, and then you're modifying the right plan number. So to configure the scheduler to run time of day plans, run coordination at some times a day, and to run free at other times a day, you have some options in MAXTIME. There is, under the Actions tab, which we got into earlier, the option to call a pattern. If you call a pattern that has a split table with all zeros in it, the controller will run what we call coordinated free operation. All that really means is you're using the information in the coordination plans to maybe modify your recalls, other things, but it is really just running free. The other option, if you want, is you can hit plus or minus on the action to choose something else. So we could configure the controller to run flash by time of day or by action, free by time of day or action, or any other option. So agencies will use both of those options, the coordinated free and the free, depending on what they want. The one important thing to know about free is a lot of the settings for what specific phase plan, what specific detector plan free runs is under the menu for controller and unit. So in this unit information, there's a bunch of information down here about what sequence do I want to run when I'm free, what phase plan do I want to run, which overlap plan do I want to run. So usually these things are configured in the coordination menus, but for the free plan specifically, it's done in the unit menu. In MAXTIME, you're running a schedule at all times. That schedule calls a day plan, and in the day plan, you can configure what the controller is going to do by time of day. So you can see, as of right now, event 1 is at 8 o'clock. We're going to run action 1, and then in the actions table, the action will correspond to something. So that could be pattern 1, it could be a free operation, and then you can just fill out the rest of the schedule based on what you want the signal to do by time of day. So if I wanted to run coordination plan 2 at 11 o'clock, I'll just key in 11 for the hour, I'll do 0 for the minutes, and then for the action, I'll say 2, hit enter, and then just to double check to make sure that action 2 is calling pattern 2, we'll hit escape, we will go to the actions menu under 3, and in here we'll see that action 2 is indeed running pattern 2. If you wanted to run free at that time of day, you would come down, hit plus or minus, and you could change what you're doing. So now we're running free at 11. Another important piece of information that you'll want to keep in mind about the day plans is that everything is in military time. So if you want to do 11 o'clock at night, you'll have to key in 2300 hours. So as you go through and fill out your information, you just want to be doing that calculation between AM and PM and military time. So if you're setting up emergency vehicle preemption in MAXTIME, you'll want to go 2 for controller, 8 for preemption, and then similar to all the other menus, you'll have the phasing, which is the values that you would want to run during preemption, and then you also have parameters. So if we go to phasing, phasing is where you'd want to turn it on and off. So right now we see preempt number 1 is disabled. So we'll want to hit plus or minus. And so now that preempt 1 is enabled, the controller will call the preemption sequence when an input comes in for that preempt. The preempt menu handles both kinds of preemption. It'll handle emergency vehicle preemption as well as railroad preemption. The track phases are the railroad phases, and then we also have the dwell and the cycling phases. So to configure this for standard emergency vehicle preempt, we want to go to dwell phases, configure 2, hit the arrow to the side, and then configure 5. So now preempt 1 will call phases 2 and 5. We'll hit enter there. That will be enough to at least make the controller enter preemption and serve those phases. But there are a lot of other parameters that you may want to configure. Those are back out in the main preemption menu. So you'll hit 2 for preempt parameters. And in here, you can determine other things that you might want to set, like a minimum amount of dwell time or maybe a delay on the input. There's many options for how you would configure your preamps in MAXTIME. Yeah, if you're in the field and an ambulance stops for a call, forgets to turn off their transponder for their infrared preemption system, some controllers will and will not cut off that input after a given amount of time. In MAXTIME, that's fully configurable. It's the maximum presence input, or not input, but parameter. So you can set that between 0 and 255 seconds for that. And if you have multiple preamps, the important thing to remember about the maximum presence timer is that if 2 calls come in sequentially, so the first one comes in, then the second one comes in, the timer begins from when the call is received, not from when it is served. So one really important thing when you're configuring your preemption in MAXTIME to prevent flash events is you need to be paying attention to your overlaps. So in MAXTIME, there are exit types. Generally, you will exit to some phases or you'll exit into coordination. For both, you'll want to make sure that you also configure your exit overlaps. So effectively, what overlaps am I going to allow the controller to enter as it's ending its preemption sequence? If you do not configure those correctly, you may have flash events. Generally, what we recommend agencies to do is to use the checkbox option, allow all overlaps. That will allow all overlaps as preemption's ending, like you would have during normal operation. If you want to be more specific, potentially not allow an overlap as you're exiting, you can configure that. You just have to configure all of the overlaps. Okay. So in MAXTIME, for more advanced operations that require lots of keystrokes, it's often easier to come into the web interface for MAXTIME. This is especially useful if you're needing multiple phase plans. You can bulk copy them. In this web interface, it might take 300 keystrokes and do it in one. It's also nicer for some of the status menus. So if you're really trying to understand the operations the controller is doing, the normal loadout screen for a controller is just limiting. There's only so much space, there's only so much you can show. In the web interface, there's a lot more options. One of the things that's a little easier to do in the web interface is transit signal priority, or what we call prioritor configuration. So to configure prioritors, the very important thing you need to do is inputs. So unlike standard preemption, prioritors are not pre-configured in the factory databases, and you'll need to tell the controller, how am I getting my prioritor calls? Many of the priority calls are from IR systems, so infrared, where a pulsing call would be, a prioritor call, and a solid call is a preemption call. In MAXTIME, you can do under Advanced I/O, go to Cabinet Configuration and your I/O modules, and then you can see which I/O modules you have loaded. In this case, we have a ITS in SIU1, so we'll go to the input points, because we're looking for inputs, and here you could modify whatever you want. The important one to know is that you will want to change the input control type to Prioritor high, Prioritor low, preempt high. And there are other ways of configuring that at MAXTIME where you have a lot of flexibility of how your inputs are coming into the controller. So once you have your inputs sorted for your TSP or prioritor operation, you'll want to make sure you turn on the feature. So at MAXTIME we have this enabled. You'll want to set that to active. You can set a lockout time and some other options. And then in your prioritor options, you can set up exactly how you want the detector to work. So there are lots of different setups for priority in the field, depending on whether you have loop detectors or some sort of center-to-center system. In our case, we're going to do a presence-only check-in. So this would be, a queue jump or a bus lane that has a loop on the near side and nothing on the far side. So we only just check in with a presence call. From there, we'll set that up for Prioritor 1, and then we can come down into the actual priority phase settings menu. We'll see Prioritor 1 is configured to be enabled, and then we'll set a priority for that, so we can set different priorities for our prioritor calls. You might have a east-west approach that's more important to you than your north-south approach. So you can configure this to have overrides and say, serve priority 1 first, then serve priority 2 if you have conflicting calls. There are, if you click on the help menu, which exists in here too, I believe there are 10 different priorities that you can assign. So in MAXTIME, you can set the priority for different prioritors. These will control what is served if there are conflicting calls. So unlike preemption, where it's first come, first serve, if you set priorities to be different, the lowest number will be served over the higher numbers. And you can assign 1 through 10 to the priority field. Once you've given it a priority, in this case, we'll give it a 1 for priority 1. You can assign phases to be priority phases, and then potentially phases that you're willing to skip, pedestrian phases that you're willing to skip, and then some other things like max presence time for the input itself, delay time, arrival time, and many other settings for different kinds of operations for your priority. So the other thing about the web menu is your changes that you make are highlighted in orange. So in our case, we've got this orange change. We haven't made this yet. We can go and review our changes, click down, see, oh, okay, we turn priority 1 as priority from 0 to 1. I'll say, okay, I want to save those changes. And now those are saved in the controller. So for prioritor inputs that are not through your I/O modules, but are through NTCIP commands using NTCIP 1211, you will see the calls as they come in on the status menus. You will not need to configure anything. That's all done with NTCIP commands, but you will see logging. So as the calls come in our event logs under administration, you can see the commands when they came in, things like that. Just given how new NTCIP 12.11 is, unless you have something that can generate those commands, it can be a little hard to test the full functionality. If you want to watch NTCIP 12.11 commands come in real time, you can do that under the status menus. So if we go to status and then Prioritor status, you can come in and under priority request, server request status, in real time you can see NTCIP commands come in, but there's not a great way to test these on the bench right now. NTCIP 12.11 is developing, and there may be better tools to do that, but you'll need a central system or custom programming to send NTCIP 12.11 requests and see these menus change. So the advantage of NTCIP 12.11 requests is that the controller is just getting more information. So, in a standard loop system, you might have a single point. You have to assign the arrival time for that point, whether the traffic is congested or uncongested. So you have a single input. You're kind of limited to that, and you have to plan around that. The advantage of the NTCIP 12.11 message set is that it's continuously sent. So if the arrival time adjusts, then the controller will get that information and can react in faster or better fashion. So the NTCIP 12.11 message set is just a lot more robust, and for that reason we can make smarter decisions. When you're setting up your MAXTIME controller for the first time, you'll want to set up your IP information. The MAXTIME controllers come with 2 separate Ethernet ports. So you've got Net 1 and Net 2, and each actually come with 2 ports. So you can configure these differently. Generally in the field, you'll configure one for your field network, and then the other for hooking up your controller to a laptop in the field, or whatever you want. It just gives you a little more flexibility. To do that in MAXTIME, you'll hit 1 to enter MAXTIME, you'll hit 3 for administration, and then you will hit 2 for communication, and you will hit 1 for Ethernet. And in here, you'll see the adapter numbers, 1 and 2. Those correspond to the first number printed on the controller. So adapter 1 is both net port 1.1 and net port 1.2. Adapter 2, net 2.1, 2.2. In here, if you want to enter your IP address, you'll just hit enter, and you'll modify each octet of your IP address. Close that, and continue across to your subnet mask, gateway, and then we have some additional options. One that's very important is the mode. So you have a static IP address, but for connecting to the controller in the field with an Ethernet cable, it's easier to use the DHCP server. So you can set up a DHCP server, and that way you don't have to set a static IP on the device you're connecting to the controller with. All right. So on the main MAXTIME menu, you'll see all of the MAXTIME programs that are loaded. Generally, it's always MAXTIME, but then we have other modules that you can use. One of those modules is the connected vehicle module. So to install that, you'll want to download that from our website. You'll plug in a USB, and you'll boot it from the USB onto the controller. Once you restart the controller, you should be able to open MaxView CV. It's a separate program. If you're using the web interface, it's a separate URL to access it as well. And in those menus, there's a separate manual for configuring all that info and uploading your SPAT data or your map data. So if you arrive at an intersection with a MAXTIME controller and you're trying to figure out what could be wrong with it, maybe a phase is getting skipped, not in Flash, but it's not operating the way you would expect. The first menu I would go to under MAXTIME would be the status menu, and then the extended summary menu. So under the extended summary menu, you will get all the information you need of what the controller is running right now. And this will help you narrow down what menus you need to check, what plans you need to check for errors. So in this case, it's currently running manual free up here, and then below you would have your cycle time, your offset, your split plan, your sequence, phase plan, detector plan, PED plan, and then overlap numbers. And then below that, you'll have your rings. So you have ring 1 and ring 2, and what's going on in that ring in real time. So right now, we're timing phase 1 and 5 men green, and we just entered yellow clearance. You'll have your passage timer countdowns and other things in here. And you can also see calls coming in. So below those 2 rings are the RS1, RS2, and in there you'll see what phases you're on, what phases are next are the blinking phases, and the manual has a great explanation of exactly how to read this screen that I would refer to. If your problem isn't very easy to solve by looking at the front panel, maybe you're in the wrong phase plan, running the wrong coordination plan, those are all easy things to see. You can also see whether communications are up. The next option is to get onto the web UI, because you'll have some more tools available to you. So in the web UI, you have some options for doing troubleshooting. Some of them are more complex, so you can look at all of the event data for the last failure. So if we go under administration, go to event logs, we can look in here at all of the entries in the event logs. These are just the basic event logs. So this will tell you if you had some faults, alarms, things like that. Under performance, you also have the detailed event report. This is every Purdue enumeration and controller MIB recorded every 10th of a second. If you really need to get into the weeds of what went wrong, you can download this, and we have a handy last failure download button. So if you're ever needing to look at that, you can hit last failure, download that files, and really get into the nitty-gritty of what went wrong in that specific cycle. If you arrive at your MAXTIME controller and you're in Flash, maybe your conflict monitor is telling you something conflicting or odd, and you want to understand exactly what happened when the controller failed, MAXTIME has the great option of doing a status replay. So you can go back in time, usually 3 to 4 hours of time is stored, and you can look at exactly what was going on with the signal at that time in real time. So you can come in here, you can slide the bar, choose what time you want. So I'd go back in time 10 seconds or whatever you think was the point of failure. You can hit play, and then you can watch in real time what was going on with the signal. So this can be very helpful for understanding what happened during a flash event if you don't have that information from your conflict monitor. Other items you can check in MAXTIME, the event data is always being recorded, and you can look at underperformance, things like the termination report, the coordination report, and see if your controller is doing what you think it should be doing. So under the coordination report, you'll be able to see the actual offset it's been running and the cycle length. If you see the cycle length moving around a lot, it's probably in transition a lot if it's running coordination. The termination report will tell you if your phases are maxing out for an hour or 2 of data or if they're gapping out. So that can be helpful to understand if you have a broken detector. You can easily pop in this menu, say, phase 8 is holding and sticking. Why? How long has it been doing? You come in here, you see it's been maxing out for the past 2 hours. Probably have an input issue with that. All right, so a lot of the time, if you get in the field, maybe a detector is broken, or you just need to place a recall on a phase to make sure it's getting the time it needs until you can get a better fix in place. In MAXTIME, there are lots of different places to put in recalls in the controller. But if you're doing something quick, there is a menu specifically for that. It is under controller for to controller, and then if you go to phase 2 for phase, and click global phase recalls under 3. In here, you can put in recalls for the controller, and they apply to everything. It doesn't matter what schedule you're running. It doesn't matter what plan you're in. This menu will always do the recall. If you want to be more specific about recalls, you can enter recalls under both phase options 2 and under coordination 5. So you could have a core plan that you only want your max recall in for that phase at that time of day and that plan, or if you have a specific phase plan where you want that recall, you can put those in there. But just in the field, go to global recalls. It also makes it obvious that someone has modified the controller by having that separate setting. If you respond to something in the field, put in a global recall, generally people will know, oh, something's been modified. Another advantage of the web UI for troubleshooting is that all of the changes that are made in a database are recorded. So if you want to look at your changes made, maybe you suspect someone made a timing change overnight, it led to a flash event, you can go into your user databases, the ones stored on the controller, go into your active database, and you can look at all of the changes that have been made. They're time-stamped, and you can see exactly what was changed. So, if you're showing up and you suspect someone's changed the timing in the past 48 hours, something is different, this is a great menu to check, see if someone's made a change, and the machine knows. So even if the person forgets, the machine will remember, and you can check and at least remove that as one of your troubleshooting options. So one option that you'll find on MAXTIME controllers that you might not find on other controllers is that you have the option to do what we call a soft restart, but effectively it's a way of restarting the actual controller without having to go into flash in the field. So instead of entering flash to do the restart, the controller waits for the all red interval. It will serve a longer all red, what you have programmed in your startup time, so maybe 10 seconds of all red. And during that 10 seconds, it will actually restart the controller. So in the main menu, which you get to by ** escape, there's the settings options and the MAXTIME options. Settings has a bit of a different name if you're using the older 2015 Linux. If you hit settings, in here you can go to utilities under 6, and for 6 again, you'll have a soft restart. So if I hit 6 for soft restart, it'll say, do you want to begin this? It'll give you a description of what it's going to do. I'm going to say, yes, I would like to do that. And then it will wait until an all red interval. It will reset. Patrick Mahedy with QFree. If you have additional questions about MAXTIME controllers, well, the whole suite, MAXTIME, MAXTIME CV, MAXTIME Adaptive, you can go to support.inlight-its.com, and there's a ticketing system and a portal to download all of the information you need for the controllers, software for the controllers, and if you don't have a controller at your desk or at your bench, you can also download an emulator and run the software on an emulator.